what we're being asked to is to actually create a new kind of set of skills and a new toolbox that does draw on a lot of things that people may already have, right? Like empathy and collaboration and this and that. And what we're being asked and invited to is to bring all of that together, I think, in new and creative ways.
Welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability. We are discussing how we can work in a way that makes a positive impact on the planet. I'm your host, Harald Neidhardt, and in this episode, we'll talk to Renee Lertzman, psychologist, advisor, and engagement strategist. What a great title, Renee. Thank you so much for being here with us. How are you today?
Thank you. Lovely to be with you. I'm well. It's a overcast day in Portland, Oregon, and feeling good.
Great start. Thank you. So I like to start talking first about your work. We will learn a lot about you. I'm really excited about this podcast episode because you are a renowned expert, strategist, and a voice of meaning and reasoning. And I'm really looking forward to learn from you. So how you define yourself as a climate and sustainability psychologist. Can you tell us more about how do you see that?
Sure. So I think to answer that question, it might help to go back to how it started for me, which was back in the days when I was a college student and I was very focused on becoming a psychologist, specifically a psychotherapist, because I had been already benefiting so much from that work in my own life. And just naturally, very curious about human psychology. And at that time, this was the late 1980s, I happened to take an environmental studies course. And the confluence of learning about a whole variety of environmental and climate threats and crises, ranging from whether it's soil or forests or water or atmosphere, toxins, materiality, plastic, all of that. My experience was, one, this is a lot to process as a human being. And two, how did we get here? Really wanting to understand that. And three, how do we support and enable people, humans, to face and really look at what's happening in a way that is actually constructive? And for me, the connection between psychology and that realm was inseparable. Because I already knew enough about the research in the psychological realm that had already been dedicating a lot of attention to understanding humans and how do humans, adapt and cope with change, with challenging circumstances. And I felt that there was something very powerful that we could be unlocking and tapping into. And my experience was going between the worlds, because I would go to my psychology classes and my lectures, and I would go to the environment studies and science classes and lectures. This is at that time, late 80s, early 90s, they still weren't very joined up. And then, I even had a summer job working at the Stanford bookstore. And I remember wandering into the leadership and organizational development part of the bookstore and seeing all this work that was about leadership. At that time, it was, Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer and, all of that. And I was like, well, wait a minute. All of this seems to be so connected. And why and how are we not connecting those dots? So for me, it's very hard to separate out the human dimensions from what it means to be a leader and a practitioner working on climate and sustainability. And it's just been that way since the early 90s.
Fascinating topic. I guess for me, it resonates that from the get-go, you were a system thinker and you see the different worlds aligned. What are the projects maybe to get started you're working on right now, just to make it maybe tangible? What this, let's say, your brain, your theory, your system thinking, how do you apply it right now?
Right. So thank you. That's a great question because the practice has evolved a lot over the years. So, and I talk about this a little bit. I gave a talk at Green Biz conference a couple of years ago, and I gave a 3-minute synopsis of the evolution of how I started out, being that activist more. And then I moved into being the educator and training as an academic and doing a lot of training. Much of my adult life has been in the research and academic world as the educator. And then realizing that I wanted to do more, that it wasn't sufficient for me personally to stay in the realm of teaching and doing research and writing papers. And so I branched out and started experimenting with engagements with organizations across really all sectors. So I'm really pleased that I have a portfolio where I've worked with government, with private sector, with philanthropy, with startups, with education, science, and really to ground it, the way that the work is implemented now is primarily through developing programs that support teams and leaders inside organizations to develop some core competencies that I regard as pretty baseline right now. And that includes a psychological kind of literacy about how do we engage with our stakeholders and with people who have very different lenses and disciplines that we do. And how do we support ourselves as people working in the space? So there's that whole resilience piece around how do we develop practices both individually, but as teams and organizations to really create a culture of care that recognizes working on these issues is very, I think it's its own category of change work. And then, I draw a lot on the research in the world of in the public health sector. It's called motivational interviewing, and I translate that into what I call guiding. And so there'll be an emphasis on training and supporting people to be guides and to look at what theories of change are that often are underlying our work and interrogating that a bit, and then moving into a more of a relational kind of way of working on change and change leadership. So there's the programmatic piece. Sometimes I'll be embedded in a team and support a leader or a VP or what have you. Other times I might be asked to provide sort of advising and thought partnership. So it's a range.
I experienced one of your workshops or your work in Sintra last year at a very beautiful event, and I was really fascinated. What I like to maybe ask as a question in diving into, let's say, your brain or the humanity, why you were talking and the system change. I had a picture in front of me. Maybe you saw it. There was somebody playing golf, and in the background, there's a blaze of 10-meter high fire, on the edge of the golf course. And he wasn't, bothered. He just kind of continued his play. So the urgency of, our platform is burning, the world is burning. There's so many things happening at the same time, which Johan Rockström and others tell us, planetary boundaries. And since, let's say, 72, we had the limits to growth and all the data is there. But what I find fascinating is, data didn't move the needle. So we have to go into the emotional and to the psyche or understanding how people work in change. So can you maybe help us enlighten a little bit how you said, how did we get here, but how do we get out of here? And how can we include human behavior or understanding of either the problems or the timeline of the problems or the urgency in our leadership work? Help me a little bit.
Okay. So first off, all information is affective. And I use the word affect, AFFECT. All information has a feeling charge to it, regardless of what it is. How humans process information is influenced by the affect. So if it's scary, if it's exciting, if it's, evokes love, awe, wonder, shame, disgust, all of these things are influence the way that humans process information. So this is just a neuroscience baseline. And so therefore, if you are working on climate sustainability, it's vital that we understand and appreciate the fact that the information that we are communicating and trying to get across is handled and communicated skillfully. And so, in other words, it's not enough to give people the information, because the conditions that support and enable us to process certain kinds of information matters a lot. And this is something that clinicians really know, because I mentioned that I draw on the work in public health, something called motivational interviewing, which is just simply a methodology that clinicians often use when you're working with humans to really confront and work on hard behavior change, addiction, or health related. And so we can relate that to the planet. We can relate that to ecological health, which is what we've learned over time is people are supported in really processing this information when, one, there's the opportunity to reflect and process it. So, and what that means is kind of sense making, like, what does this mean? Kind of let whatever feelings might come up be there, because when we learn about any number of ecological threats, it can be quite emotional for a lot of people in very different ways. And so how do we acknowledge that? And then joining that up with a plan of some kind. So joining that up with a, action plan or a roadmap is also very important. And then the third piece that's very important is that people need to, we are social beings, we're relational beings. We make sense of the world through our consensual reality and our relationships we're in. And so we also want to recognize that it's important for people to have other people in their lives, in their workplace, where you can talk about and kind of engage with what's happening. And so oftentimes one of those ingredients are missing. And usually it's that we're trying to push people very quickly from here's the information into here's what we can do. And when you do that, we're literally short-circuiting the human kind of cognitive processing that can allow us to, quite honestly, access much greater capacity for action, because it's coming from a place that's more sort of grounded. Like, okay, I need to get my head around this, and for some people it might be, I need to go and just be in the woods, or I need to just take time, but I need to really let myself metabolize this. Okay, now what does make this make sense for me to do and for us to do as a team or as an organization? So what's missing largely are those spaces. And then what's also missing, unfortunately, more and more is that a lot of humans are now experiencing the news about what's going on, often at home on social media. And so you don't necessarily have that, what I called the relational home, a place where you can actually talk about it. And so that's where I see organizations and brands coming in and playing a incredibly vital role. And that's why I see organizations and teams as serving as almost like engines and incubators of human potential.
Yeah.
if you have those conditions in place.
Interesting. So like placemakers for reasoning, or giving the space to reflect and digest. It's almost like wintering also, that we need some time to, get into the new season, so to say.
Exactly. And oftentimes, when I say this, I think people draw certain conclusions like, oh, we don't have time. We're operating on really, intense timeline. And she's suggesting we sit around and talk about our feelings. And that's not at all what I'm saying. I work with, like I mentioned, I've worked with all kinds of companies and orgs. And what we can do is approach this in a microdose way, where we can almost think about how to build in spaces like oxygen into the system that doesn't necessarily require that we all go off on a 3-day retreat, which is awesome. And I have done that recently with a CSO and her team, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be a whole way of working where we are introducing and sharing information, but we also include from a design and a facilitation perspective. Let's just take a moment and reflect, or turn to the person next to you. Just doing that changes the neurochemistry of everything that we're talking about doing in that setting.
You gave also a fascinating TED Talk, which had 2 million views, which was called How to Turn Climate Anxiety into Action. And in this talk, you mentioned grief and that people have a window of tolerance. What do you mean by that? And why are these ideas important aspects with climate change and environmental issues?
Well, so grief is one aspect of the experience of confronting climate and the environment. And I also just want to clarify that the talk is really not only about climate. So it was called that, but it's really about, existential kind of ecological issues as a whole. And the window of tolerance is there's a popular neuroscientist named Daniel Siegel, who's written a lot of books where he himself has helped to translate a lot of research into tools and frameworks. And so, and he calls his field social neurobiology. That's kind of a field that he's helped develop, which is, really recognizing that we're not just individual brains, but we are social neurobiological beings.
Yeah.
And so the notion of what he calls a window of tolerance is a reference. It's a psychological term that refers to a window where, in terms of how much stressors humans can handle, that if we go outside of a window, oftentimes we either collapse, kind of fall into a collapse mode, or an activation mode, like a angry kind of almost like acting out kind of chaotic energy, or a sort of collapsing withdrawal, shutting down, kind of those are the extreme poles. And so what he's talking about is how do we support people in expanding our window of tolerance so that we can really take in and stay regulated. Our nervous system is regulated, which means that we retain access to our, higher functioning, capacities, imagination, foresight, empathy, strategy. This is all what we're needing right now.
Yeah.
And yet it's actually, the paradox is it gets kind of shut down very quickly and easily when we are overwhelmed with what seem to be, really just issues that are very scary or overwhelming and so forth. And so if we become more literate in understanding these terminologies like window of tolerance, it really helps us kind of approach our work and our teams in a more effective way.
I think it's a great build-up for my main question, or our main question is: we talk about the leadership of chief sustainability officers in large organizations, and I know you have experience with work on with these leaders. Now, in these insecure times where people are short-circuited, we have quarterly earnings and all these things. We have a window maybe of tolerance or window of work until 2030, 2050, a different one, net zero. So everything is rush. And on the other hand, I feel that some people, let's say, oh, we only have 6 years. Well, but as you are, let's say, from Silicon Valley also, we know 6 years, that's 6 new iPhones, that's 6 generations of, I don't know, NVIDIA chips. So a lot can happen on the solution side. Now we're talking about the person in between, potential solutions, big, challenges, less understanding, less tolerance. How can these leaders survive, or how can they actually effectively lead? What is your point of view on that, and recommendation maybe?
My perspective is that CSOs, leaders, change leaders, are in a position now where I guess I would say I'm biased. So my perspective is that where the investment should be is on human development primarily. And by that, I mean recognizing that navigating these conditions and showing up as an embodied leader, someone who really walks the talk, someone who stays calm, someone who stays focused, who has that capacity to be incredibly, ability to make decisions quickly, but also taking the long view. All of this requires that we develop ourselves as fully high-functioning human beings. And for me, that means doing kind of investing in the development of your people, making sure that your people, you and your people, are given opportunity to grow and evolve, particularly relational skills. By that, I mean the ability to work with teams, work across diverse cultures and backgrounds, and stay grounded and stay centered. And that's why, some folks might be familiar with the Inner Development Goals framework that came out a few years ago. And I appreciate it because it's a very simple way of drawing attention to the fact that in order to, really address these issues, there's the inner work and the outer work, and these are not separate. So it's just not a binary anymore. If we show up as effective leaders, and, it also means that you have to learn how to stay grounded, how to, foster enough self-awareness so that when you're being triggered and when you're being activated and what to do about that. It really goes back to, the work of Ron Heifetz, who wrote a lot about adaptive leadership. And I found that very relevant for chief sustainability officers. I always recommend his paper, The Work of Leadership, when I start working with a leader and a team, because he talks a lot about what it means to get up on the balcony and being on the dance floor, and that ability to toggle. And to do that, it takes intention and practice and compassion for ourselves and for each other. So that's my long, rambling way of saying that I think my advice for CSOs and for leaders is to invest in your own development, human developmental work, and the development of your people. And that could look like a whole variety of things, but think outside the box. Don't, a lot of companies I work with have really impressive L&D departments. And often they'll say, well, thank you. We got this covered. And my response is, you don't, because what we're being asked to is to actually create a new kind of set of skills and a new toolbox that does draw on a lot of things that people may already have, right? Like empathy and collaboration and this and that. And what we're being asked and invited to is to bring all of that together, I think, in new and creative ways.
Let me have a follow-up question on that, because first of all, we're also big fans of the inner development goals and let's say bring meaning into this whole world. Now, one of the things we're doing is bringing curated convening, bringing communities together, like CSO leadership people. And you have some practical advice and views on how we can show up at events there's big events in New York and in Davos and all around the world, the COP series and so on. And people are challenged to participate and then perform. But there's also a gigantic chance in these, let's say, personal, almost say creative collisions. What's your take on it? Share with us a little bit of your advice to make this more meaningful.
I am actually writing something up about this, because after that summer where we met at House of Beautiful Business, that summer I was at like 6 different quote impact gatherings, and they were very different, but I came out with the sense of, okay, we have some opportunities here to, really look at what it means to curate and convene. And that the responsibility of curators and conveners has never been more important. And that I think more and more leaders and organizations need to step into that role of curation and convening and see your role as a convener, which you are doing and you're modeling really well. I feel like these communities that you are fostering, this is where the action is. This is what people want. And so we want to be very thoughtful about the design and the experience. And a big part of that is recognizing that what you're doing is you're building and creating a container. You are fostering what's called a field, so an energetic field. And that's the kind of thing that people experience from the very first moment that they have any interaction with you. It could be the email, it could be the invitation, it could be literally when people walk in the door. But you want to really foster a atmosphere that lowers the anxiety and lowers the social anxiety. And a way of doing that is by keeping it feeling really relaxed, right? And also just appreciating that one thing that really helps people is being put into small, like with 1 or 2 people, where you get some time to just introduce yourselves and connect at a deeper level, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah. And so I always recommend, doing that right off the bat, because it helps make the event more kind of easy to metabolize, so to speak. I also recommend, when possible, putting people into small groups or pods that ideally can stay connected throughout an event. Like especially if it's a full day event or a multi-day event, where you get to check in with each other and just say, how's it going? What have you heard? Because remember, I can't remember if I said it with you or my earlier call, but when we speak about our experiences, it helps us integrate what we've learned. So dramatically, it changes the neurochemistry dramatically. So get people interacting in small groups. I also, feel strongly about the fact we're in between formats right now, where there's a recognition that the kind of panels and the keynote has a certain role, but most people are wanting much more dialogue, much more connection. And so again, I feel like there's an opportunity to be creative about formats here and be really mindful of when we default to the old, like getting up there and someone talking at people, because at this point, a lot of the people in the room have a lot to contribute and a lot to say. Yeah. And you want to create that way for more and more people to really experience each other in these convenings and these formats. And then the other thing I would just say is practicing the self-awareness of noticing when you are moving into a kind of anxious transactional realm versus, trusting and really just appreciating, the quality of the interactions in the relationship versus the, feeling like I have to connect with as many people as possible.
Yeah, I can't wait to be in a room with you and experience some of these curated moments. We will find a way in the next, in our future, in our desirable futures, hopefully. It's been a fascinating talk, short, and we could extend it and have double the amount of time, but maybe we find another venue for that. I really thank you for your insights, for your work, for your leadership in these issues, and giving us the time and opportunity to learn a little bit about your thinking. But I know there's so much more. If you like to know more about Renee, please follow her LinkedIn. She's really sharing a lot of insights and her learnings and her thinking publicly online. If you catch her in one of the events, please make sure you say hi. And Renee, thank you again for being in our podcast. Thank you so much for your work, and really have a fantastic day until we meet again.
Yes, thank you so much. Lovely to speak with you.